There are places in this world where logic fades, and something else takes its place. Places where a whisper in the dark may not be the wind, and a shadow in the corner may not be alone. Tonight, Passport to Horror opens the door to 4 true stories, each one a thread pulled from the edge of reality. From haunted hallways and spectral strangers to sorrowful farewells whispered through the veil. These tales aren't fiction, they're memories, fragments of encounters too vivid to forget. Welcome to the unexplained.
Three years ago, while I was studying in Lyon, France, I took up a part-time job during the winter months at an old and expensive restaurant nestled in the historical district. The building had stood there for centuries, its stone walls worn with time, echoing the quiet remnants of eras long past. My job was simple but solitary: clean the entire restaurant every morning before noon. I started at 5 in the morning, while the rest of the city still slept. It usually took me 2 hours to finish, leaving just enough time to make it to my university classes. But soon, that job became more than a way to earn money. It became a brush with the inexplicable. Each day, I would arrive in the freezing pre-dawn, and the first thing I always did was lock the heavy wooden doors behind me. The clank of the bolt echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. I'd then disable the alarm system and switch on the ancient heating units, though it often made little difference in the bone-chilling cold. Every window remained shut tightly, and no one else arrived until 11 a.m. The place was mine, and mine alone, until then, or so I believed. It wasn't long before I started feeling watched. Not just the fleeting kind of paranoia that comes from being alone in a large space, but a thick presence, a weight in the air. Sometimes while I was sweeping or wiping down tables, I'd feel a breath of air at the back of my neck, a whisper of movement behind me. I'd whirl around, expecting someone to be there. No one ever was. The feeling that I wasn't alone clung to me like mist, but with classes to rush to and no tales of the place's history to feed my imagination, I brushed the sensations aside. The building had 2 floors, and when I worked upstairs, I'd often hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the staircase. Not creaks of old wood settling, but hurried, deliberate steps, up and down. Sometimes I would pause and rush downstairs, expecting to see my boss or the chef arriving early, but the doors remained locked and no one else was there. I'd recheck the lock just to be sure, but it was always secured. These moments made my heart race, yet I pushed forward, convincing myself it was just my mind playing tricks. The power of suggestion, perhaps. But then came the sounds of doorknobs rattling, faint whispers, and the occasional clang from the kitchen. Each time I would check, I would find everything in its proper place. The restaurant had strange spots where the coal lingered unnaturally, untouched by the heaters. In those areas, a peculiar feeling took over, as if something unseen was standing right next to you, refusing to budge. The basement, though, was the worst. It housed a massive wine cellar, and I had to visit it often. The air was always damp and cold, much colder than it had any right to be. And then there were the sounds, not so much heard as they were felt. A low vibrating hum that seemed to come from deep within the stone walls. It was as though the cellar itself breathed, mourned, remembered. For 3 months I endured these strange happenings. They became a routine, a part of my job. I never once felt directly threatened, but something instinctual inside me told me that what I was encountering didn't belong to this world. And still, I never let fear take over. Maybe that's why nothing ever harmed me. Then came my last day. That morning, I was waiting outside the restaurant for my boss to arrive so I could collect my final paycheck and say my goodbyes. It was close to 11:30 a.m. when one of the barmaids, Sophia, arrived. Since I had the key, I opened the door for her and waited outside. Barely 15 minutes passed before she burst out of the restaurant, pale and visibly shaken. She lit a cigarette with trembling hands, her breath visible in the winter air. though her face was slick with sweat. I asked her what was wrong.
It's as usual. The things inside scared me.
I was puzzled and asked her what she meant.
Don't you know? Ghosts.
She said she heard the familiar footsteps and voices, and then she felt someone touch her shoulder. I could see it wasn't a joke. Her fear was real, etched deeply into her face. When I told her I often worked from 5 a.m., she was stunned. No one, not even the boss, knew I started that early. She said had they known, they would have stopped me. Working alone in that place before sunrise was dangerous. Sophia told me the building had a reputation, whispered about among staff. People claimed the ghosts were from different eras, centuries even. The theory was that the continuous presence of food, drink, and luxury attracted spirits who longed for what they'd lost, or perhaps never had. The restaurant had always been some sort of social hub, a bar, a tavern, a hotel, and it seemed many souls had decided never to leave. She recounted tales of cold spots, voices in empty rooms, shadows that moved just out of sight. Even a story of an employee who nearly slipped into a trance after hearing whispers in the basement, only snapping out of it at the last moment and fleeing in panic. Still unsure whether to believe her, I mentioned it to Adela, an older colleague in her 60s. She had always been warm and down to earth, and I respected her deeply. When I told her what Sophia had said, her face darkened. Not only did she confirm the stories, she reprimanded me harshly for working alone so early in the mornings. She told me about a night when she, the boss, and another employee were having drinks close to midnight. Out of nowhere, the restaurant was rocked by deafening bangs and screams coming from the kitchen. The place had been locked, and they were the only ones there. When they finally summoned the courage to check, they found the kitchen in chaos. A heavy trolley had somehow slammed repeatedly into the rear door, which was securely locked. Knives were scattered across the room, embedded into wooden panels, sticking out of cutting boards, some lying dangerously close to where a person would have stood. If someone had been in that kitchen, they might not have survived. After that, a priest had been brought in to bless the space. Things quieted down, temporarily, but soon the strange happenings resumed. I finally understood why the pay at that restaurant was so much higher than average. It wasn't just the prestige, it was the danger. Looking back, I believe I escaped something I didn't fully comprehend. Perhaps by not acknowledging the spirits, I kept myself safe. Or maybe I was just lucky. But ever since then, I've been careful. I never enter old buildings casually. I always ask questions, because sometimes it's not just history that lingers. It's something much older, something that watches, waits.
Before I go on, I want to thank you for bearing with my English. It's not my first language, but what I'm about to share transcends any language barrier. It's an experience that carved itself into my memory so deeply that I can recall it vividly even decades later. Ever since I was a child, I found myself drawn to the paranormal. I read everything I could about ghosts and unexplained happenings, and I would bring them up in conversations more than most people were comfortable with. Yet for all my fascination, I'd never had a real encounter. Nothing I couldn't rationalize, at least. A creaky floorboard here, a cold draft there, perhaps a mouse in the attic or the wind whispering past the shutters. But when I was 16, something happened that defied all logic and still resists explanation to this day. It was the winter of 1998, just after Christmas. I was living with my mother, my two younger sisters, aged 10 and 12, and my stepfather and his two children, a boy of 14 and a girl of 8. That year we had to spend the holiday with my stepfather's family in Verdun, a city steeped in historical weight but emotionally barren, at least to us. Its legacy from World War I hung in the air like the ever-present winter fog, but our visit had more to do with strained familial obligation than any deep-rooted connection. The visit was awkward and tiresome. We never felt particularly welcomed, and the atmosphere among the relatives was tepid at best. So when December 25th finally rolled around, and we packed up to leave around 5 p.m., a sense of relief swept over my sisters and me like a warm wind, except, of course, it was still bitter cold outside. The drive back took us through narrow, twisting roads lined with thick forest. In the summer, those tree-covered roads could feel almost magical, cool and shaded like a secret tunnel. But in winter, they turned sinister. Fog clung to the ground like smoke. Ice slicked the curves, and the dense woods seemed to close in tighter as the daylight faded. The trees, leafless and skeletal, loomed over us like silent watchers. We traveled in 2 cars. My stepfather drove ahead with his 2 children, and my mother followed close behind with me in the passenger seat. My sisters were bundled in the back seat, fast asleep, their breath fogging up the cold windows. My mother and I chatted idly, trying to ignore the eerie quiet outside. That was when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moved, but not like an animal darting across the road. This was upright, tall, impossibly tall, and it leapt from the left side of the forest like a phantom sprung from the earth itself. It was black, darker than the shadows, and shaped like a human but grotesquely stretched, as if someone had taken a normal person and pulled them like taffy until they were 2.5 meters tall. Limbs too long, torso too thin, and head shaped like it was carved from rough wood by someone who barely understood the human form. It didn't run, it bounded 2 heavy jolting steps and landed directly in front of my stepfather's car. And then he drove through it. No thump, no crash, just passed through like it wasn't there. I gasped aloud. My mother immediately slowed the car but didn't stop. She didn't swerve. Her eyes were fixed forward. The road seemed frozen in time. We approached the figure, still standing there, still unreal. Its head turned to us. Though it had no eyes that I could see, I felt its gaze. That invisible connection, where something sees you, truly sees you, not just with sight, but with intention. I stared back, frozen, and as I did I noticed it held something, a large square object, clutched to its chest and attached to its wrist by a rusted chain. The object looked heavy, ancient, as if it had been dragging it for centuries. The chain shimmered ever so slightly as it moved. The creature didn't threaten us, it didn't move to attack, it looked terrified. That's what struck me the most. It was afraid. Somehow it passed that emotion to me in waves, palpable sorrow and deep, echoing fear. It was lost. It was trapped, and in that instant I understood that this thing was not meant to be in our world. It didn't want to be seen. It wanted to flee. Then, with a swift movement, it bounded again, just as quickly and silently as it came, and vanished into the woods on the right side of the road. Gone, like it had never existed. But I knew what I saw. I felt it. We didn't say a word for the next several minutes. My mother caught up to my stepfather's car. My sisters stirred in the back, murmuring about being cold, but quickly drifted back into sleep. Finally, my mother broke the silence. "Did you see something?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "Did your stepfather drive through it?" "Yes, it must have been an illusion, with the fog, most certainly." And that was that, for the moment. Months passed, and I almost convinced myself that it had been a trick of light, fog, or imagination. But then, during a dinner party, the topic of ghosts came up. I shared the story, describing the shape, the jump, the chained object. Everyone fell silent. Then my mother spoke. "I saw something too," she said. "But it wasn't shaped like a person. It was a thick white mist. It moved just like you described, but it didn't have a form." That was when I knew. It wasn't just a shared hallucination. We had both seen something real, but filtered through different perceptions. Her mind saw mist. Mine saw a man-shaped creature chained to something heavy. The eyes see the world, but perhaps the soul sees the truth. I never found out what it was. We never took that road again. I began researching the area and found that many stories floated around those woods. Tales of soldiers who never left the battlefields, of fatal car accidents and restless spirits. But none mentioned a chained figure, except one. There's an old legend around Verdun, a cautionary tale about greedy landowners who moved the boundary stones of their property in secret to gain more land. They were said to be cursed, to roam the earth in spirit form, dragging the stolen marker stones until they returned them to their rightful place. If the figure I saw was one of them, it had clearly been walking for a long, long time. So long, perhaps, that it had forgotten how to appear fully human. If anyone has a more plausible explanation, supernatural or not, I would welcome it. But deep down, I know what I felt. It wasn't just seen, it was sensed. And some things, once felt that deeply, are impossible to forget.
I recently moved from California to France for the second half of my junior year of high school. I'm staying with my dad's best friend from high school and her family, all of whom I've known since I was a baby, so it wasn't like being dumped in a house of strangers. Still, everything felt new. New house, new language, new school, new routines, and apparently, new ghosts. I've been here a little over 2 months now, and though this happened during the first week I arrived in Paris, technically the third week of being in France since I spent 2 weeks with my dad's family in Corsica before heading to the capital, I kept putting off writing about it. Maybe it's the usual procrastination, or maybe I just didn't want to revisit how unnerving it truly was. It happened one night, or morning really. Around 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep, still stuck in that uncomfortable limbo of jet lag and cultural overload, so I was on the computer chatting with my best friend in Ireland. He was also doing an exchange, spending the second half of his junior year there, and we kept each other sane across time zones. The house was quiet, everyone asleep, and the only light in the room came from my laptop screen. Earlier that evening, I had made myself a late dinner, some pasta and eggs, a comfort food combo I grew up on. German dish, don't ask. Around 3 a.m., I remembered I had left the plate out, and not wanting to leave a mess or risk waking anyone by clattering dishes in the middle of the night, I figured I should go put it away. I told my friend to hang on, grabbed the plate, and headed down the hallway toward the kitchen. Now, here's where the layout of the apartment becomes important. The hallway I was walking down runs right alongside the kitchen, dining, and family room area. If you're standing in the hallway near the end, you can see part of the kitchen and living area. But if someone's in the kitchen, they can't see you until you turn the corner. There's a weird blind spot, basically. As I was walking, I started getting that prickly feeling on my neck and arms. You know the one, like someone is watching you. I brushed it off at first, but right as I reached the edge of the hallway, still hidden from the view of the kitchen, I heard a voice speak in French, "Que faites-vous?" which translates to, "What are you doing?" What made it truly unsettling wasn't just the timing or the fact that the voice came from a room I hadn't entered yet. It was that the speaker used the formal version of you. Not the informal too, which is what everyone in this house used with me since we were all on friendly terms. The voice was male, unfamiliar, and calm but firm, almost defensive, protective. It didn't belong to Liz, my dad's friend. It wasn't her husband or their daughter either. I knew for a fact their daughter was fast asleep in the room next to mine. She had work the next morning. And the husband, same deal. Liz sometimes stayed up late watching TV, but even if she had, the voice wasn't hers. And again, she never used formal French with me. I froze for a second. Maybe it was the television, maybe someone was talking in their sleep, but none of it made sense. The voice sounded too real, like it was coming from someone physically present just beyond the hallway. Still, I forced myself forward. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, or the unfamiliar setting messing with my head. But the moment I stepped closer to the kitchen, I heard it again. Que faites-vous? The exact same tone, more like a guardian questioning a trespasser than a homeowner catching a teenager sneaking around. It didn't sound angry, but it wasn't friendly either. I turned the corner into the dark kitchen, my heart now racing, and that's when I saw the silhouette. There was someone sitting on the couch across the room, just barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. Not Liz, not her husband, not their daughter. This person sat rigidly, their form outlined in shadow, head tilted slightly like they had just asked a question and were waiting for an answer. My instinct screamed to back away, but I kept moving, like an idiot, toward the dishwasher. I opened it slowly, placed the plate inside, trying not to make a sound. I could feel the silhouette watching me, its presence growing heavier with every passing second. I avoided looking directly at it. Something inside me refused to meet its gaze, even though I was sure it was staring at me the entire time. Out of the corner of my eye, I could still see its outline, unmoving, sitting upright with an intensity that made my skin crawl. As I turned back to walk down the hallway, I still didn't look directly, but I knew it was watching me leave. I could feel the weight of its attention like cold breath against the back of my neck. The moment I stepped back into the hallway and turned away from the room, I ran. Not a full sprint, but quick panicked steps back to the safety of my bedroom. I shut the door behind me, locked it, and returned to the glow of my laptop, heart still thudding in my chest. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed online with my friend, rambling about nonsense just to distract myself. I never mentioned what happened. How could I, without sounding crazy? The worst part is, I had hoped this trip would give me a break from all the weirdness I used to deal with back in California. Back home, I had a fair share of strange experiences. Disembodied voices, shadows moving where they shouldn't, even dreams that didn't feel like dreams. I thought I had left that behind when I crossed an ocean, but maybe it's not something you can outrun. Maybe some people are just magnets for this kind of thing. Maybe, no matter how far you go, something follows.
It happened years ago in 1996, only a few days after I lost Phil, my best friend, my ex-boyfriend, my soul connection. We had a bond that defied simple definitions. Though no longer romantically involved, we shared the kind of closeness people spend lifetimes searching for. We had gone to school together, shared the same hobbies, the same friend circles, and most evenings, even after seeing each other during the day, we would spend hours talking on the phone about anything and everything. My mother never really understood the dynamic between us, but she accepted it nonetheless. It was just the way we were. That first week of March, a birthday party was planned at a club for one of our mutual friends. I hated clubs. I still do. The noise, the chaos, the flashing lights, they never suited me, so I declined the invitation, choosing instead to stay at home with my friend Julie. Phil was disappointed, I could tell. He wanted me there, but he didn't push. He respected my decision, even though a part of him probably wished I'd changed my mind at the last moment. We had shared too many memories for him to stay upset. That night, Julie and I spent hours chatting and laughing, trying to make the best of a quiet evening in. But as the hours crept by, a strange unease settled over me. I couldn't place it, but I felt something wasn't right. I even told Julie that I had a bad feeling. A creeping sensation of regret for not going to the party. It was like a warning without a source. The air felt too still, the laughter a little too forced. We stayed up late into the night, brushing off the discomfort but never quite shaking it. The next morning passed without much activity, but by early afternoon a sense of waiting took hold of me. I couldn't explain it. I went out into the garden, a space I often retreated to for clarity, and stood by the gate. Something told me I had to be there, as though something, or someone, was coming. And then, like a slow wave cresting over a quiet sea, I saw a group of our friends approaching. Their faces were pale, their eyes red-rimmed, some of them still visibly shaking. My heart stopped. I opened the gate and they didn't have to say a word. I saw it all in their faces. Phil was gone. He had died in a car accident the night before after the party. No one had been able to take him home, so he accepted a ride from a stranger, along with another mutual friend. Just 100 meters from his home, the car crashed, violently. Both Phil and the other passenger died. The driver survived. The details were too awful to describe. His death was not gentle. It was brutal and swift. And just like that, he was no longer part of the world I knew. Shock overtook me. I couldn't even cry at first. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I was frozen inside, numb. It was as though the grief couldn't find a place to settle in me. It ricocheted around, lost in the hollow spaces he left behind. I moved like a ghost myself in the days that followed. Before the funeral, I stayed at Phil's house. 2 nights in his bedroom. Yes, he was there. His mother had chosen to keep him at home for a short time before the burial. I slept in the same room, on a mattress beside his bed. I saw him, touched the linens near his resting place, and endured the silent darkness that those nights brought. The sight of him during those 2 days will stay with me forever, though I will not share it here in detail. It is a memory too sacred and too raw for casual recounting. The funeral came and went like a blur, and I returned to my own home still feeling adrift. A few nights after the burial, something happened that I have never been able to explain away, not even with time or reason. That night, I was sleeping in my room, still unable to fully process the grief. In the middle of the night, a cold air stirred around me, enough to wake me. Not a draft from the window or the shifting of blankets. This was different, focused, intentional. I sat up, blinking in the darkness, and in the corner of the room near the foot of my bed, I saw it. A glow. A soft, subtle halo of light. It shimmered in place for a few seconds and then took form. Phil. He was sitting there looking at me, not smiling but calm, serene. He looked like himself, though lighter somehow, as if his body were less burdened. I didn't question what I saw. I wasn't afraid. There was no fear, no shock, only peace and a strange amazement. I sat up fully, my eyes fixed on him. Then, slowly, he raised his hand. Without thinking, I got up and moved to him. I dropped to my knees beside where he sat, wrapped my arms around him and rested my head on his knees. I could feel him. His presence wasn't symbolic or imagined. He was there, solid, real. I felt the warmth of his legs through his jeans, the texture of the fabric. My arms didn't pass through air. They held something tangible. I wept without realizing it. I asked him 3 questions. Where are you? He answered, very far away. Are you all right? He replied, yes. Will you come back? He hesitated, then said, I don't know. We stayed like that for a moment longer. How long, I can't say. It felt both like seconds and hours. And then he faded, not all at once, but slowly, like mist dispersing in the sun. I didn't see him leave. I only realized he was gone when the weight of my arms dropped onto the empty floor. I awoke the next morning still sitting on the bed, tears streaming down my face. It was the first time I had cried since his death, an entire week after the accident. Something broke open in me that night, something I had kept locked away in denial and silence. He never came back to me after that visit, not in dreams, not in visions, not even in feelings, just that once. Was it a goodbye, a final moment of grace? I'll never know for sure. But I carry that night with me as a gift, a parting embrace across the veil. I know what I felt. I know what I saw. And no one, not time, not disbelief, not even grief can take that from me. If someone out there has experienced something similar, if you've been visited by someone you've lost, I would be so grateful to hear your story. Sometimes it's in the sharing that we keep their spirits close. Take care, wherever you are. And to Phil, thank you for saying goodbye.
Some stories end in silence. Others, in a final glance, a whispered goodbye, or a presence that lingers long after the lights go out. As you return to your world, remember, Those who live these stories didn't ask for them, and neither will you, because the line between the living and the lost is thinner than we dare believe. This has been another journey through Passport to Horror, where true terror never needs an invitation.